Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thanks for coming back for this panel session. That was a great one that we just heard about tribal broadband. Really exciting, and really appreciate all those efforts to reach those hard-to-reach places in California. If we could ask you, head out perhaps. Thank you, so that we can give our attention to this panel. And maybe somebody back there could also shut that door. I don't know if somebody could be so helpful. Thank you. So I'm really delighted to introduce my colleague, Dr. BRANDIE NONNECKE, who's the founding director of the Citrus Policy Lab, as the moderator of this panel about 5G. She's joined by distinguished colleagues, and I'll let her introduce them, but thanks for joining us.
Great, thank you, Pam. Good morning, everybody. I'm BRANDIE NONNECKE. I'm the director of the Citrus Policy Lab. Today, our panel is 5G Hope and Hype, Strategies to Support Equitable and Effective Deployment. So we've all heard the buzz around 5G networks and their vast potential to power new technologies that connect infrastructure, cars, and people in ways that will revolutionize our lives. By increasing the capacity for the simultaneous operation of connected devices in one location at unprecedented speeds, 5G networks promise to provide significant gains in sustainability, mobility, and economic opportunity. While 5G networks may bring significant benefits, ensuring these are felt by all community members remains a significant challenge. This panel will outline the challenges to the equitable and effective deployment of 5G and recommendations for models and policy strategies that should be implemented at the federal, state, and city levels to better ensure equitable and effective deployment of 5G. I'll now introduce each of our panelists, and then we'll have each of them provide about 5 minutes of remarks on key opportunities and challenges, and then we'll open it up for a discussion among the panelists, and then open it to audience Q&A at about 11:05. So let me introduce the panelists. Melissa Slawson is General Counsel and Vice President of Government Affairs and Education at GeoLinks. She started her career at the California Public Utilities Commission as a regulator. I'm sure she has a lot of stories to tell. She then moved on to private practice, specializing in regulatory work before joining GeoLinks. With deep expertise in telecommunications regulation, Melissa will undoubtedly provide an insightful perspective on regulatory changes that are both supporting and hindering equitable 5G rollout. Our next panelist is Matt Rantanen, to my left here. He's the Director of Technology for the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association and Senior Advisor of Tribal Broadband for Golden State Network. Matt has been a key advisor to the FCC on equitable broadband rollout in tribal communities. His deep expertise in empowering the unconnected and identifying innovative technology solutions will provide a valuable perspective. And last, Ramesh Rao Foran is the director of UC San Diego Division of the California Institute for Telecommunications and Information Technology, Cal-IT2. He is the first holder of the Qualcomm Endowed Chair in Telecommunications and Information Technology in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at the Jacobs School of Engineering at UC San Diego. Ramesh has authored more than 230 peer-reviewed technical papers on a wide range of research topics in wireless communications, including architectures, protocols, and performance analysis. His deep technical expertise will provide insights into innovative technical strategies communities can pursue to close the digital divide. So first, we'll open it up for remarks. We'll maybe just go in order.
I'll let Melissa go first.
Oh, God. Oh, okay. We'll let Melissa go first.
I like to go last.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I will maybe give a shortened version of my intro from yesterday in case folks were on the panel yesterday or at the panel yesterday. Melissa Slawson, I'm with GeoLinks. GeoLinks is a hybrid network provider. We're an ISP. We specifically focus on the fixed wireless side of things. We have network not ubiquitously throughout California, but throughout California, expanding our territory into Arizona and Nevada. We were successful in the Connect America Fund, getting grant funding for California and Nevada, and then we recently received approval under RDOF for Arizona and Nevada. So we're really focused on deploying into areas that don't have high-speed internet or have maybe no internet. And so we have found success in the fixed wireless space because we've found that we can deploy very high speeds, sometimes gigabit plus speeds to our customers at a fraction of the cost of fiber and a fraction of the time. Our time to deployment is sometimes, it depends on the project, but like a 20th the time of fiber. So we're talking rapid deployment for folks who need internet right now. So that's what we're focused on. But I think one of the challenges that's facing 5G rollout is similar to a challenge that we're facing, is there's not, and I'm sure Matt will talk about this too, because he talked about it on his last panel as well, but there is just not the backhaul or open access middle mile to some of these areas where 5G has not been deployed. Maybe that means that 5G won't be deployed, and without that high-speed backhaul and access to middle mile or funding for deploying the middle mile, the concern is that these areas will remain without this service. And from the GeoLink's perspective, 5G sounds really cool, guys, but it's just not really a reality now, and the specifics of it require so much deployment and infrastructure that we do not see it as being the fix to the rural broadband problem that it's been sold as. And also, while it says 5G on pretty much everyone's phones, it's not the 5G that they've been talking about for years. So there's still a lot to be worked out, and at this point it's kind of a question of, is it marketing, is it real, will it actually solve problems, and are we actually having the conversations that are needed to be had in order to have it be a solution to many of the problems. So I'll stop there and let one of my colleagues pick it up.
Go ahead, Ramesh.
Okay.
Matt likes to go last.
Matt wants to go last. Again, like you said, really happy that we have this opportunity to see each other in person and share ideas, not only in formal sessions like this, but out in the hallways. So I wear three hats. I've been a professor at UC San Diego working on wireless networks for a long time. I serve as the director of the UCSD division of Cal IT2, and after Larry retired, I've been serving as the director of Cal IT2, which has now grown to include UC Riverside in addition to UC Irvine, which is a networking opportunity for us. And like I said, I do research in the field, and I bring a certain implicit bias maybe. What's the real research question in all of these discussions that we have? So rather than stay at that top level, I wanted to share with you three stories that might illustrate how somebody in a position like mine might get involved with 5G and beyond. So I'll take you back to 2010. One of the entities that we created at our institute is called information theory and its applications. I don't know if you've heard about information theory. It's one of the more abstract pursuits, and you wonder, does it have any practical applications? But back in 2010, at that time, a young postdoc worked on something called polar codes. And it seemed like a useful thing, list decoding of polar codes. And so he disclosed it to the Tech Transfer Office, and it wasn't clear if it was worth anything. And so the Tech Transfer Office filed for a US patent for list decoding of polar codes. It was issued 5-6 years later. And amazingly enough, without UC participating in the 5G standards making process, polar codes are a part of the reverse channel for all 5G systems. The implication of that is that UC regions sit on an IP, which it doesn't have to license to anybody on fair and equitable terms because it never participated in the standards making, but which is critical for anyone that wants to run 5G in the United States. We didn't think it was worth anything globally. Otherwise, we would have filed for a global patent on it. It has resulted so far in one non-exclusive license, which generated the largest financial deal outside of life sciences for UC in its entire history. And it started out with a researcher pursuing something that to them was just curiosity driven, okay? And it took 10 years before we realized its value. The second story I want to share, it's a little personal. If you look it up, you'll find it. Google on Cyber Shuttle and Cal IT2, not right now, but later. April Fool's Day on 2002, we put out a press release where we tied what was then a non-commercial version of data over wireless. It was called the HDR system by Qualcomm, to a Wi-Fi access point and put it on a campus shuttle bus. And we drove around the campus, and people on the bus had Wi-Fi access over a wireless backbone. This was 2002. 3G didn't even exist. What drove that stunt experiment, interestingly enough, was this pseudo-conflict. There were people who were saying 3G was going to kill EVDO. And if you really understand the technology, one was designed for mobility support, and the other one was designed for, much larger usage. And there were many more people who had Wi-Fi modems built into their. So using one to backhaul the other back then was kind of an unusual thing. And strangely enough, every few years, I get contacted by a law firm because somebody attempts to sue one of the big phone makers for claiming that they have a patent on hotspots. And nobody has a patent on hotspots because we gave it away. This is prior art. We just wrote it up. It was a press release. So I was in the session yesterday about hotspots and what happens to hotspots. That was 20 years ago that we did that. The third thing I wanted to bring up is CBRS. UC San Diego has been up in La Jolla, but recently it moved to the edge of the Promise Zone in San Diego and purchased a facility. There's a new trolley line with fiber along it that the university has access to. So we are the anchor institution in San Diego downtown Promise Zone. And lighting up the neighborhoods in that space using new technology, in particular CBRS, is something that we've been pursuing. If you're into CBRS, which I know some of you are, San Diego is absolutely the most difficult environment in which to do CBRS because of the large Navy presence. So we've had the opportunity to collect data and try to understand how effective this might be. We've also been going to other locations like Mount Laguna. Frank Vernon is here, HP Ren, that's another 20-year-long project, trying to reach spaces that are hard to reach. And making real measurements in contested environments teaches you a lot. So maybe we'll have a chance to go into more details, but let me stop there for now.
So maybe I wanted to go second. Those of you, I think everybody's still the same people in the room, but so Matthew Rantanen, I am still currently at the Tribal Chairmen's Association working with 25 federally recognized tribes that are in a diverse geographic space, from the Palm Springs area all the way to the southern border with Mexico and throughout the valleys and the mountain regions in San Diego and southern Riverside County. So I get to see a wide variety of opportunity or lack thereof. And we're specifically focusing on the 5G monster, as it were, today. And we have a perspective on, what that means, because we sit there, all the way back to the EDGE network, and then the 3G network, and then the 4G LTE network, and now the 5G ultra-wideband network. We see this from the tribal perspective more as a marketing scheme than an actual rollout of technology, because nothing seems to change in Indian country. We have towers, we have access to cellular signal along the roadways only. The antennas are designed to capture the transient population on a California roadway. They're not designed to penetrate perpendicular to those roadways into the communities of the reservation. So if you live in the first row of houses off of the road, you have cellular access. If you're up over the ridge onto the rest of the reservation, you typically don't have any cellular access, or it's very poor. It was a real slap in the face to those companies and to us when the children went home during COVID and were required to operate from remote, where they didn't have access to broadband, but the school systems were like, we'll just roll out hotspots. We'll just roll out devices to every single home. This will solve the problem. And so they're reaching out to folks like us, and we're saying, take a hotspot, drive out to that reservation, and find me one location past the first 100 yards into that road where you can actually function and utilize that to do online schoolwork. And it was an epic fail. So they were grasping at straws trying to get the Tribal Digital Village Network to hook up all the homes and all the communities, of which we explained on the last panel that there isn't enough spectrum to pull that off. We would love to hook up every single home and every reservation, but we actually physically could not make that happen at capacity because of the lack of spectrum. So, you hear 3G graduate to 4G LTE. What does that mean? Okay, well, it's a new thing. We got to buy a new phone. I got to, upgrade my gear. What do I get to do on that? 4G LTE, over the years that it was deployed, actually became fairly functional on reservation because of the propagation of the antenna technology. The physics behind the antenna allowed it to penetrate further, and we actually had some access on reservation, and we were able to do some stuff. In the process of the last 21 years, I used to carry a Sprint telephone. I used to carry a Nextel cell phone. I've carried an AT&T cell phone and a Verizon cell phone, based on the changes of the evolution of 3G to 4G LTE to 5G, because of the coverage area changes in the propagation of antennas and how they actually supported their own networks in upgrade. So for a while we were using certain phones, and then those signals were so weak and other phones became more prominent. A different company did a different investment in their own infrastructure, and then we had more coverage, so we switched to that phone, or we carried two. We moved to the point then when we were on one service. We're currently on a single service, and recently we had changes happen. We watched our phone say 4G LTE and overnight switch to 5G, when we know for a fact that that throughput hasn't changed because we speed test everything on the planet. Anything that happens, we speed test it, we check it, we drive around, we test it, because we're network geeks. So that 5G symbol came on my phone and no throughput change happened on the Paula reservation. So what is this 5G thing? Is it marketing? Yes. Is it, how to sell the next device, how to reinvent yourself as a carrier, how to make more money from the same population that's already oversaturated with your product? Yes. Do you ever reinvest in your network to actually get what is claimed to be 5G services, ultra-wideband services to those communities, or is it now just a name on a phone so that you can say that your network has been upgraded? So we do know that they actually upgraded the network in the Paula reservation, because after the 5G symbol came on, more than half the reservation lost cell signal, because the propagation physics of the antennas is shorter distance or less distance. So when they lit the 5G symbol and changed that antenna system on their existing infrastructure, they did not add new infrastructure to cover the current distribution zone of 4G LTE. They just let it ride on the same tower, and now half of that reservation can no longer use the phone service. Period. 0 calls. At my office, I cannot make a call on my cell phone. I don't have any signal. So, okay, you switched over to 5G, but did you really reinvest in your infrastructure and build out the same service area that you were currently serving in 4G LTE with 5G? That's the problem I think reservations have. What little we did have just diminished, right? What little we did see of that, it just reduced, and it just, it shrunk in size, so that now we don't have access to as much as we used to on the old system, which maybe wasn't as fast as the new system. But now, what's the point if 10 people have fast service and these 500 people don't anymore? So these are some of the things that we'll talk about today, about like what that means and why it makes a difference in Indian country. Thank you.
Thank you so much. To sort of summarize some of the key points that you all made, Melissa, you brought up a really great point about the need to access infrastructure and the need for backhaul and middle mile access. And Ramesh, about the power of curiosity and the role of experiments and pilots and testing, which sounds like could have come in handy in Matt's case, where they didn't think about the harmful spillover effects that, oh, by the way, these people actually won't have access. And really talking about the risks of marketing hype and harm of assuming a technology solution will be successful. Before we get deep into our conversation on possible technology and policy solutions, I would like us to get down to the base of, well, what is actually 5G? What are we talking about here? Open to anyone.
I think we both look at Ramesh.
You know, there is so much that has been written about what 5G is. You know, there is new spectrum, there are new technologies, there are new use cases. Maybe we should pick up, I should pick up on the use case things. You know, it's designed to support lots of kinds of fairly diverse applications. So, for example, very high bandwidth. You want to be able to go up to gigabit per second to a phone, right? Unheard of before. We built microwave repeater stations to do lower data rates. But what might be a good application of such high data rates? The one that is my favorite based on what I'm seeing is augmented reality and extended reality systems, right? So you want to be able to overlay all kinds of digital information wherever you might be, standing at the beach, and it looks like that would take data rates of about 200 megabits per second for one user, right? And if you want to have a group experience with your augmented reality glasses when you're out somewhere, you know, that's a lot of data that you have to move. This is one application that I think the 5G system is explicitly designed to support. Another one that I think might also come close to us fairly soon is this extremely low latency, and I think the way we are going to experience it is various versions of autonomous driving, for example. I think everybody gets driving, and right now autonomous driving appears in high-end automobiles, but I think as you look into the near future, next 3 to 5 years, you can imagine kits that will allow you to retrofit existing vehicles and add degrees of driver assistance, where between edge processing and cloud processing, you know, having very low latency will make a huge difference. Another one for which I don't know how much of a business case there is, but I think given what is happening with climate change and sustainability, being able to get an accurate, high-fidelity readout of what's happening in their environment. Like we are in California. I was going to ask you, we didn't have time, how much of a concern fires are in the Indian reservations.
Massive.
Massive, right?
Yes.
And so this infrastructure, which we might think of as supporting communications amongst humans, can also be used to monitor the environment and build digital models that will allow you to anticipate, you know, these kinds of catastrophic events and take precautions. So I think having very large numbers of low data rate sensors deployed in the field, unattended over very long periods of time, far from the 200 megabit per second extended reality type of application. 5G is designed to support that too. You know, it is a business proposition. These deployments will follow where the money is, and there are different industries that will perhaps underwrite these things. So the insurance industry, when it comes to fires, you know, that's where there's a lot of interest. They stand to make money or lose money depending on how they place their bets. So these things don't happen very quickly. I should stop here, but I wanted to agree with Melissa's thing. I don't think there'll be a day when there's going to be this great big pop and everybody is going to be calling their friends and saying, I got on 5G, you know. It's going to slowly creep up. It's going to be almost invisible, as it should be. It's what it does for you that you should be paying attention to, not the specific ways in which it is being engineered, because I think that will not be uniform. We'll all get better services in different ways by mixing different kinds of technologies dynamically in different physical locations.
Well, and thank you for mentioning that at the end. So looking at the positives, I think the whole Internet of Things argument is a very strong one for the need for 5G. You know, besides the individual use cases of, you know, what can I do with my phone? How can I VR with my friends on the beach? You know, will my Instagram feed be better? You know, that kind of stuff. I mean, that's all good, and we want consumers to have access to the latest and greatest and best. But I think that there's a lot of implications for the Internet of Things and smart homes and smart things and smart cars, and you know, it's going to help us conserve energy. It's going to help us hopefully be safer. It's gonna, you know, we see a lot of positives with that. But going back to my point that is his point, that's my point. The rollout piece of it, and one thing I neglected to mention when I was first speaking is, there's a lot of spectrum access that's been either granted to wireless carriers, traditional like mobile wireless carriers, for 5G rollout, and it's become a big priority in the spectrum space with the FCC. Oh, this can be used for 5G. Oh, that can be used for 5G. Oh, we should hold this for 5G. And it hinders the ability for companies like Geolinks and others who are trying to get access to licensed spectrum, because licensed spectrum, a lot more can be done, higher throughputs, less interference. It's got a lot of implications for like fixed broadband connections to people's homes, to people's, to schools and libraries, to places of business. And so there's only a finite amount of spectrum out there. There's only certain bands of spectrum that can be used for different things, and there's a lot earmarked for government uses and things like that. So if you're giving it all away to the big, I guess it's big three now, but big four to do 5G, well, then you're not taking into account the other uses that could get broadband to the home more quickly, et cetera.
Yeah, and from the tribal perspective, we do have our share of gamers and virtual reality folks, and they're always the dreamers that wish that this throughput comes through for their entertainment purposes. But the reality of it is that we don't have a connection in a lot of places. So 5G promises this broadband speed that we will be able to do functional things that we don't have a terrestrial network that's serving our house currently. Maybe our cell phone will then take over that opportunity. We'll be able to do our, school interactions or our work from home interactions based on our phone. And, what we saw with 4G LTE and understood that we had coverage, that we expected to have coverage in that same space. And as that coverage shrank, then we realized, well, this is a take it away proposition, and potentially it will creep out and fill all those places that 4G LTE used to fill. And hopefully they still support their 4G LTE antennas on the same equipment so that we don't lose complete functionality. But, I'm going to speak a little bit for Spaggy here, but you could use Google Earth when you're out there trying to work on your network and try to understand something, or do, a topology cross-section to see if you have line of sight from a tower to another tower, or do you have a tree problem? What is the opportunity of, migrating a tower to a different location when you're in the field doing discovery work? Our EPA departments, looking up resources and accessing existing databases that are in their reach if they have access to internet, but doing that from the field. Doing interactive classrooms from the field for people that can't get to the field. Doing interactive and video-based, discovery as far as resources and water and things like that happen on a daily basis. Tribal historical preservation officers that are in the field that are trying to identify an artifact that was uncovered during a construction project so that they can keep that construction project moving and identify whether or not that's a relevant artifact that needs to be cataloged, or is it, a replica from, made in China Navajo pot. Are these the things, as we graduate into this technological age and speed and opportunity, these are the things that would make our lives a lot easier in the general functionality of doing things on the reservation, but it has actually reduced. So until we see that coverage come out and have opportunity, we're a little skeptical.
Thank you all. We've discussed quite a bit about the challenges, so I'd like to pose a question of what are some successful models for supporting equitable 5G infrastructure development and user access that you've seen?
Well, I'm just going to pimp Golden State Network and the California Department of Technology's work right now through SB 156. Fiber densification across the country is required to make this happen. You cannot backhaul a cell signal and throughput for one phone at 1 gigabit per second if you don't have fiber to aggregate all that data coming from all the handsets and then bring it back to the rest of the world, right? You need that fiber backhaul from each of those towers to be able to pull this off. And without that, it will not work. It will never work. So as states like California and efforts like what California is doing, building that fiber ring architecture to densify the fiber throughout the state and bring more backhaul opportunity to rural, remote scenarios, 5G will not be able to roll out. So that is a successful model, and it goes hand in hand. Wireless goes hand in hand with that backhaul fiber.
Yeah, I would say it's similarly, just broadband grant programs generally, because it's encouraging and funding deployment of network assets to areas that didn't previously have them or that had inadequate ones. That will allow companies like Geolinks, for example, we could provide some middle mile access points for 5G companies. Fiber is, I think, preferred in some situations, but there are areas where fiber can't be built. So in order to truly extend the reach of 5G technology, because the assets will already be there, perhaps that will help extend it more easily than needing to go out and build fresh infrastructure pieces.
Or a stopgap until it gets there.
Right.
Yeah.
So, perhaps I'm repeating myself, I don't think we should get religious as individual consumers or as individuals responsible for enterprises to just bet on one technology. You want to put together, it's a quilt. You take advantage of your location, you take advantage of who's done what, you want to be very dynamic, and stitch it together. That, by the way, is what the providers are trying to do. If you're a provider today, you're looking aggressively to offload your traffic onto enterprise networks as soon as you can, right? So there are many technology vectors that point in the direction of just understanding which maybe satellite works in certain environments better than anything else, right? So you don't want to exclude anything. And so these devices, at the end of the day, whatever they might be, is where there is this intelligence on selecting sometimes dynamically what is the most attractive way at that point in time. And there is more and more power. So you can be more sophisticated. You can run fancier algorithms. You can machine learn patterns of activity in advance. So you know how to leverage and orchestrate on the fly. So that would be my answer. Yeah.
And actually, I have a follow-up question for you, Ramesh, and then I have some questions for both of you. I know that you've talked with me a lot about open architectures, and this seems... Oh, sorry, I'll get into the mic. So I'm asking Ramesh a question about open architectures, mixing and matching from multiple vendors, which feels like it piggybacks nicely on your last point about using different types of technology. Could you discuss some of the opportunities and constraints?
Yeah, so thank you. This is one of those hard-learned lessons. We've all heard the story about how in the old days, before we had the protocol stack, we were all beholden to IBM selling you cables to connect their computers at whatever price they wanted to charge you. And we created open standards and, made it possible for new entrants to come in. And it feels like we should be trying to do that everywhere we can. But, when you have a lot of moving parts and things don't work, who are you going to go to for help? And when you have multiple vendors that you're working with, to first order, everybody points the finger at the other person. So if you are trying to put together a low-cost system by integrating modules that were supplied by a whole bunch of different vendors, you have to be the world's best debugger of problems, right? So if you think you're getting into this business of mixing and matching to save money, you might be in for a rude shock, okay? Or there might be an opportunity for a new kind of business to emerge that is in the business of integrating and monitoring in real time and figuring out what works with what else and so on. So this is a hard-earned lesson based on our own deployments, our own experiences. But I was talking to somebody, a big provider, we all know their names, and they are in this business. On the one hand, they want to promote standards so that they can have white box solutions from different vendors that they can mix and match. And they say they can see sometimes there is code that checks to see what's upstream of them and what's downstream of them and switches behavior, okay? There was an EU judgment against some of the vendors because you can appear to be adhering to a standard, but muck things up if not all the modules come from one vendor, right? We are getting into a very complicated world here, and it's not for the faint of heart. If you think you have the expertise or you have the ability and you can afford to hire somebody who will do that for you, go for it. Otherwise, you'll discover that it isn't all that it's cut out to be.
Thank you, Ramesh. And Melissa and Matt, could you talk a little bit about the role of partnerships, like public-private partnerships and other partners that you work with to help support infrastructure development and access?
Yeah, so I mean, there's lots of examples. The example I gave yesterday on the panel was the Valverde project, because there was a need. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Sorry. I'm a little loopy this morning. I'm tired. Day 3 of a conference.
It's all the seafood.
I'm ready to go home. Okay, so the Valverde project I think is a good example, and I won't belabor it because for folks who were at the panel yesterday. But essentially, there was a need identified. There was a pot of money that the school district had, and they said, how can we leverage what we have, and how can we leverage what is out there and combine forces into creating a solution that will serve the whole of this district and not just the school and not just a select few students that need the help, because we see a need in the whole community. So I think that's something that can be, that's an example that can be used to give ideas for other public-private partnerships. There's, in that case, we use the scenic backhaul. So there's backhaul available here. This community needs help here. How do we get between them if the community is willing to put up money or purchase infrastructure or utilize infrastructure that they have, something like that, and then the collaboration happens. So I think with 5G, I mean, it would be similar if a community wanted 5G and it wasn't coming in a certain amount of time, then they could potentially work with the 5G provider to figure out a creative solution to get it more quickly.
So along those lines, and then expanding a little bit, tribes have trust issues. Is that safe to say?
I saw the thumbs up.
Yeah, thumbs up. We have tried to form partnerships and have formed partnerships in the past that have burned us, obviously, from day one. Welcome that boat on the East Coast. So you have a history of being taken advantage of. So we're very wary of new partners and partners that want to, okay, there's billions of dollars flowing through the federal government to tribes directly right now. Do you know how unbelievably embarrassing it is to see all of these consultation firms jump in the water to grab that money from tribes, or to saddle up next to a tribe to be a part of a project, because now they can fund their firm and they know there's fresh dollars, rather than doing really active philanthropic efforts. Yes, they're going to get paid, but philanthropic efforts to make sure that there is a solution in place that doesn't drain the coffers of these tribes, that doesn't saddle them with burdens that they're not going to survive. Sustainability is a real thing, and after the money goes away and after you go away, are we going to make it? Because did the model that was developed with you, is that going to help? So those partnerships are, we're very wary of partnerships from carriers, from consultation firms, from engineering firms, from legal firms, because we've been taken advantage of in the past, and now finally the money is flowing directly at the tribes, so it's even more dangerous. So we know we can't make it without these partnerships, but we are now working together as much as we can to help vet these, these industry experts, if you will, who are coming out of the woodwork to participate with tribes. And we're looking at track records, we're looking at experience, we're looking at solutions that tribes have been working with them together and actually developing together, rather than being told we know how to solve your problem. So we're getting smarter at this. Every industry that we get into, we excel at, and broadband is that newest industry. So we are teenagers in this space at the moment, and we are growing up fast. We're very wary. But the Tribal Digital Village Network that I am a part of has over 100 partners over the last 21 years. Could not have done any of those steps without those partners. We have graduated to levels, and one of them, I don't know if Frank's still in the room, but one of those partners is the High Performance Wireless Research and Education Network. Hans Werner Braun, so those of you know, was our mentor day one and taught us how to make a wireless connection in his kitchen between two chairs, two radios sitting on two chairs, and taught my network administrator at the time, Michael Peralta, and then said, now go out and build this on a mountain. And so we had that support system from day one. We've had UCSD's support for a long time. Cal IT2 has been supportive in the past. There's a number of supportive partners. Scenic is a partner. Scenic and Lewis Fox helped me develop a way to get Scenic's connection as our head-end connection, to drop our price for bandwidth below $1 per meg so that we could survive and scale our network to be able to serve our communities. The partners range from federal government to private foundation to just industry experts and folks along the way. The father of the internet, Vint Cerf. There's everybody is a partner, and they've been very gracious partners, but we understand that those relationships must be managed and are delicate, and both sides of that partnership has to be good for both, right? We understand that part. Everybody needs to get paid. We understand that part, but the concern today is the predatory piece of the puzzle, and that's one of the reasons why in the last session I was talking about the boot camps. Now the tribes are partners with each other, right? In institutional knowledge, in sharing of assets, and sharing of solutions and builds. Now the tribes can rely on each other and not have to step outside of the tribal sphere to get some of those answers. And those answers are much more trusted coming from, that our own space. Not that we don't trust you, but we don't trust you.
Thank you so much. And actually, your example of this kitchen tutorial with radio links and boot camps actually made me think about the role of higher education institutions, and to bring it back to the earlier point about the power of curiosity and experiments. Ramesh, could you quickly talk about the role of higher education institutions?
Yeah, I think there's a self-interest that higher education institutions have in making sure that the pipeline of students who are interested in higher education remains vibrant, that students come prepared. And I think increasingly, certainly over the last 5-10 years, there have been many more intentional efforts at building this pipeline. To again be concrete, thanks to the budget surplus, to some extent, the state funded workforce development award. So we got millions of dollars. 4 institutes together got $20 million specifically earmarked for workforce development. So bridge the gap between what we traditionally offer our students as they graduate and what industry needs. If one reason why 5G may not be taking off as fast as we would like it to is because we don't have enough people certified on climbing towers. We certainly don't teach that at the university, do we? So there's many more opportunities for universities to play a significant role before students arrive and as they graduate. Across the UC system, for example, there's been this tremendous recognition of the need for master students. We have thousands of master students in each campus now that didn't exist just 5 years ago. And it's partly driven by feedback from industry about the unmet workforce needs. California doesn't have a whole lot to offer by way of taxes or real estate prices, but a trained workforce is what keeps California competitive. And I think there's this recognition that we all have to find ways to build alliances so that we keep that pipeline going.
And to touch on that specifically, higher education, four-year institutions, and that traditional aspect of higher education, I think our partners in that space are now starting to realize that there are abbreviated versions of their higher education that will support the infrastructure build of the networks of the world that don't actually have to be like a bachelor's or a master's program, but through Cal IT2 and through some of the technical institutes and some of the tribal colleges, there can be programming at the 1-year and 2-year level with certification processes that allow tribal individuals to become 6-figure salary experts in networking without stepping into that college space, if you will, which is a really tough path for a lot of tribal kids. Whether it be grades, opportunity, funding, whatever the case, or just the concept of going somewhere for 4 years and learning at an institution away from home and being away from your community. Now there's opportunity to be able to be certified and advance to the point of a very functional network builder, and have a very, very competitive salary at home, right? So there's a very great opportunity at home. And I think what we're looking for, and which is why the boot camps started, and then why we are looking at institutions and have been doing this now on universities. We partnered with the University of Oregon. We're going to partner with Arizona State University to do these. As we're looking at the universities now to adapt some of their opportunity to bring, that awareness to their incoming population of students, as well as their outreach to high school. Because on reservation, we have this gap of age 16 to 25. A lot of people in that space are floating free. They either don't finish high school, barely finish high school, or didn't have a great experience finishing high school and are in limbo. COVID has left them out of the job market because they couldn't, the jobs weren't there. Things, there were problems with that, as we all understand. And then, they're floating free for the last 3 years, and now what are they? They're 20, 21, and they're stuck in limbo. They don't know what to do. And then all the way up to 25, this group of people has not been exposed to the fact that there is a career path in the architecture and infrastructure of networking. They understand, yes, I use the internet, yes, I know how to use a computer, they did that in school. They don't know the guts of it. They don't know the background of the spine of this industry. This is a great opportunity to educate that group, and even further into adulthood, but that group on a career path that they never had exposure to. A lot of this job market is spending time outdoors, thinking conceptually, planning, working with other experts, grouping together as a team, really great and fun experiences that they just didn't even know existed. So this is one of the things I'm working with some of the universities, and would love to work with you on, where there are training opportunities to get tribal folks in that age group on a pathway to understand that. And they may understand that they don't like this industry, which is a win in itself. You don't go down that path, you don't like it, just check those off the box and then move on to something else. But if you do like it, maybe there's a space in this for us, because we are all shorthanded on network folks, even in the private industry, but the tribal industry is empty of bodies that want to be doing this. They just don't have the exposure to it. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much, Matt. And actually, yeah, as Ramesh mentioned, we do have a workforce innovation program in Citrus. We have been thinking about developing something called the Connect California Corps, where we'd have faculty, staff, and students go out to the community and help them better understand infrastructure and also how to apply for and receive subsidies. So I think if there are no other points that you all want to make right now, we could open it up for audience Q&A. If anybody has a burning question. Yeah, and the mic is there.
Right and left.
Hi, I'm Travis, Geeks Without Frontiers, working with tribes a lot, but nowhere near to 21 years like Matt yet. But the question is about, I just moved here from Germany, and Germany's done something with 5G around private licenses, less than $2,000 a year, or even one-off. They've got up to 200 things. So my question to the panel is a private 5G license something for digital equity? And I'm thinking specifically in the tribal context, and the caveat of the backhaul is there, but is that something we could sort of mobilize around? I don't know.
So wait, let me get back up there. So private equity, meaning?
Digital equity.
Oh, digital equity. Oh.
So, it's a way, like to your point, on the tribe not getting access, right? Well, if they had a license, then it would be in their hands, right?
Maybe.
Well,
I don't know. It works a little different in Germany.
Yeah, he's talking about private 5G networks where the carrier has sliced off some spectrum and is leasing it to, an enterprise. It could be a port, could be a manufacturing company. So it kind of talks to you, something you said in the earlier session, Matt, about, here's this licensed spectrum that is covered in your area, but it's not being used. That would be a kind of a piece of that.
So since some of us are in this business, you could run a private 5G over CBRS right now.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's, so I'm just going to dial this back to a couple simple things. A lot of the tribes, there's 574, right? A lot of the tribes are not as advanced as Hoopa, right? So, or do they have the human capacity to be able to pull this off? They need out-of-the-box solutions that aren't geek-driven. We don't want to know how to code. We want to plug it in, use a graphical user interface, and make it function. We don't want to have to, get to the level of what Cal IT 2 is capable of in every situation. So we need to have diverse solutions for different types of communities to maybe make that happen, because not everybody is as advanced as the HOOPA or the Tribal Digital Village Network. And I'll tell you, Tribal Digital Village Network's been around for 21 years and we don't code anything. We just press buttons.
Travis,
Yeah,
I was
finish
going to say
up.
something else. There's a completely different space where some of this is being experimented with, which is basically inside the DoD itself. So creating 5G IoT solutions at the Navy base, at the Marine base, right, for them to manage their logistics and so on. So there's a version of that experiment that is unfolding.
And the problem is the word experiment. We don't want to be that experiment. We would like to work with solutions that are functional. I mean, if we develop experimental processes or R&D that help us internally, but we don't want to be an industry experiment. Like Spaggy got stuck with a certain radio company. They got stuck in a beta test in a live scenario where they had customers live on a system that somebody was working out the bugs in their software. We're willing to do that if we know that's what we're getting into, but not to be taken advantage of and utilized as a test experiment. So I think there is some possibility in evolution there, but there's a lot of thought process that needs to happen.
Yeah, well, let me just add, just the concept of having their own spectrum. I would think if there's other resources available to help leverage that spectrum, I mean, a plug-and-play option, for example, an out-of-the-box option, I think that would be helpful. I mean, I don't know the extent to which 2.5 is helping tribes, but I know that was made available fairly recently. And so I do think more spectrum is a good thing.
Yes.
So
And
I want to be a little
that-
positive on that, because it would be a good thing.
And there is a really deep record on the open docket at the FCC in 2011. I don't remember the number. I used to remember the number for about 9 or 10 years, but I gave up on it. It is an open docket at the FCC about spectrum, and there are some pieces in there that industry absolutely fought tooth and nail to make sure it didn't happen. But there are some really relevant chunks of that open docket and comments that would have made inroads into tribes getting access to these functional pieces of the puzzle. What we're seeing now is that tribal priority window, which was from radio, FM radio. It was adopted. We took the chunk of that language out and we put it in the 2.5. If that can go in every piece of movement on spectrum, then all of a sudden the tribes have access to the toolbox, right? And that's what we're promoting there. And yes, more spectrum and more licensed spectrum is key.
Okay, so if we could dial this back to the title of the seminar in terms of the 5G deployments that are taking place in urban environments to adjust, places like the Promise Zone, and looking to do that as economically as possible. So Ramesh brought up the point of, that some of the dangers of open source, open radio access networks, disaggregated hardware and software solutions, but they're all very tempting, to bring low cost to it. And using that, my question particularly for Melissa and Ramesh is, deploying 5G, using open source types of things, things like maybe a Magma Core, which is pretty good for CBRS probably, but using unlicensed spectrum and these other types of technologies to deploy 5G. If you could just talk briefly about the issues of deploying 5G over unlicensed spectrum and some of the solutions that may look tempting to people, what some of the pitfalls might be.
All right, so this is why lawyers shouldn't be on technical panels. Now, I will let my fellow panelists correct me, please, but I think the deployment of 5G couldn't be done over an unlicensed spectrum just because of how 5G functions and especially in urban areas, the uncertainty of interference possibilities within those areas to the 5G, just because it's unlicensed. That, for those who may not know, that literally means anyone can use it for pretty much anything as long as it's legal. So it could cause interference. So geolinks, for example, we've moved away from 5G to the extent we can. I'm sorry, 5 gigahertz. That's the unlicensed spectrum. Sorry, I'm conflating my terms. So 5 gigahertz spectrum, the unlicensed spectrum, where we can, just because we want to make sure that we can have higher throughputs, which is difficult over unlicensed spectrum. That said, I would say once the 5G is in place or near in place, unlicensed over 5 gigahertz, for example, applications could be utilized. So it could be then therefore an extension of the benefits of 5G for other uses. That's what I would say with that.
You might be able to pull it off in rural more than urban.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that answer.
So a couple of points in response to the question. 5G means different things to different people, but I think there are some expectations around safety, public safety, right? Being able to, 911 calls, right? So we have an expectation that, and, codified. And so you can't be working with experimental systems if you have to simultaneously guarantee that you can, geolocate somebody who's making a 911 call. And that might be a good reason why the providers are cautious in how they roll their systems out, right? They want to be able to maintain certain standards. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect that I wanted to say was, you can roll out 5G. Right now there is LTE on CBRS bands. You can roll out 5G, very, very soon in your own CBRS band, but you're at the mercy of the spectrum access service provider who can pull you off the air because an incumbent or a primary access licensee decided to use the spectrum. That's how CBRS is architected. It's a pyramid with 3 layers, and the top of the pyramid is an incumbent. And they owe you no advance information about what they're going to do. They won't even tell you. You have to figure out that they're active and get out of their way, right? It's hard to build a business model which is going to be subject to this kind of disruption, especially in certain places. You may be able to do it in certain rural places reliably, but even there, you can't guarantee because something just might happen. So again, goes back to the comment I was making. I think if you mix all of these things together so that there is opportunities to fall back on a different technology all the way to satellite, right? So you might be able to robustify your offerings by melding together all of these opportunities. So it's cost that you're trying to play the game with, right? There is something which is at low cost when it's available, and so you exploit that, but don't rely on it 100%. But by the way, this is a great research problem, so we enjoy this. You're sitting here for the last 12 months making measurements on what does the Spectrum Access Service actually do to us here in San Diego. And it is the weirdest thing what they do. They bluff, right? I mean, that's what you're up against. There's a game you're playing with them, and very different from promising service to people who rely on it.
Robert?
Hi, Robert C. with USDA. Something, Matt, you said earlier when you were talking about, this shift from 4 to 5, the claim of 5G, and how the service dropped. That you had connectivity under 4, and then when it went to 5, the cell phone service dropped. So it got me thinking about this whole issue of the backhaul part, that maybe you can lay out in clear, simple terms, in terms of for 5G, because obviously, I guess the towers have to have some kind of fiber connection. And so what's the range? Because it's part of the problem of 5G. If you're going to show up and promise 5G, if you have to have, I'll make it up, twice as many towers to cover the same range that you already got with 4G, because that is the issue for rural, that if you need more towers, and there is that, it sort of says, oh, 5G, it's wireless, you get all this coverage, and it implies a lower cost compared to fiber. But if you still have to run the fiber out anyway to the towers, is there a significant savings? Because I've seen studies that says there actually is none.
You can go ahead and interject. We have about 5 seconds.
We have 5 seconds. Okay, I'm going to answer this in 5 seconds. So I think circling back to the previous question and tying this together is that if we can leverage our federal access to dollars to build infrastructure that would entice these carriers to be a part of that new infrastructure to put out more propagation, more antennas, more coverage. We can tie this whole thing together. It depends on which company you're talking about and which spectrum they're using for 5G. Some of it is 150 yards. Some of it is a mile. 4G LTE can be up to, I think, 5 miles or maybe even 7 miles with great line of sight. So it's a wide variety of problems there, and it's not one solution. But the solution is backhaul, whether it be big fat wireless pipes or fiber. And I think tribes owning their own assets of fiber and some of that backhaul and building that with their federal dollars is an enticing situation where we can lure those companies in to serve the endpoints and enhance our network opportunities and create multiple paths out over that fiber rather than just our own local tribal network, but bring in 5G solutions on top of that and maybe even other carriers to give a solution. I think we're better off. And we're out.
Great. Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking our panelists.